Hi, I'm Bianca Stone. I'm a poet. I've published three full-length books, and my fourth full-length book is The Near and Distant World from Tin House Books, coming out in January.
Let's
And
go.
it's actually an entirely a book. It's not even that secret. Full of the psychoanalytic dyad, self and other conflict.
What we originally talked about 10 years ago, which was the relationship between analysis and poetry and alexithymia, and the power of language as a symbol to capture meaning, which has enough causal power to facilitate change, and the total poetic slash philosophical slash psychological illiteracy that permeates our culture, be it practitioners or lay people or poetry students. I don't know how offensive you want to get, or spicy, but we can get spicy. And how important it is. And the overlap is something that's certainly not talked about enough and certainly not celebrated enough. Or
Wait, how important what is language? Is that what you're talking about?
who knows? I was just
Yeah.
improvising.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no, language as a facilitator of healing. But as we talked about when we first met, don't tell my life, that poetry is an experience, and that same with therapy. And that I thought maybe that's what that was always my dream of when I first started talking to, that people don't fucking get that. So I did an episode with Jace Long, did an episode about being and becoming, sort of, what was it, Fairbairn? I think it's Fairbairn. I could be wrong, so don't take that to the bank. But it was essentially ontological psychoanalysis versus epistemic. And most people, including some analysts, think it's like an epistemic pursuit.
What is epistemic?
Meaning knowledge-based, intellectually based, because you learn it at an institute in an intellectual fashion, top down, because how else is pedagogically, how else do you teach it until you start doing your own treatment and then doing your own training with patients and then attending class, and then it all sort of becomes multimodal and embodied and alive, and
Yeah,
then
it's hard
you
to
are
teach the embodiment part of it.
right. And if
Yeah.
you can't do that, you're fucked. And then I don't know how we could talk about how we maybe even first met too. Of somehow I saw your tweets because of whatever algorithm, maybe before Elon or something. And you were saying something about the phenomenology of poetry and how important it is, how poetry is an experience, it's not an intellectual thing. And then I was talking, remember I first messaged you or something and talking about like the poetry 101 I had to take as a creative writing minor in college. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing because I didn't know poetry was like an experience. And I just thought it was an easy way to get a B because it was shorter than writing essays.
Yeah, I definitely have some undergrads who are like, I'm taking this class because it's just like need a little break from like my harder classes.
Right, exactly.
Jesus. I'm like, all right, get ready. But it's always at the end of the semester, they're like, starts like, I just didn't realize like how hard it is to write a poem. I was like, yeah, writing a good poem is harder than just like your diary entries.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Especially a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
So
think, well, I guess one place we could start too, that is one thing that, if I'm remembering when we first started interacting on Twitter a couple years ago, one thing you were highlighting at the time was misunderstandings about what psychoanalysis is and how most people don't understand the complexities of what it can mean to be in psychoanalysis. And we have these like, well, for me, for so long, I always thought it was, I mean, I didn't fully, I just didn't, I had my experience with seeing therapists was always very miserable and very cognitive behavioral therapy at best, And I remember seeing you talking about that and thinking, yeah, it's frustrating too with poetry on the other end, is like people don't understand the complexities of like what goes into being a poet and living as a poet in the world and writing actual poems. So I've over the years I've been getting more interested in what is the phenomenon of the poem. And I grew up around poets. I grew up writing poetry and seeing poetry, hearing poetry. I still feel like, what does it mean that a poem is an experience? What does it mean? What is in psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy was these moments of like discovering experience or having experience that is so transformative and that where something happens, something actually changes.
Right. What is the mutative agent, as they say? What is the change agent?
Yeah, what is the change agent in this instance of the phenomenon of the fact that what you're primarily dealing with is language and words and finding new words. I don't know. I think of like what you're saying in terms of studying psychoanalysis and knowledge of you can't really learn what the experience of psychoanalysis until you're actually in it, right? I mean, practicing
I mean,
it.
I
Yeah.
don't think so, certainly. And even then, your analysis can fail in essence, or you could fail yourself in that if the analyst isn't facilitating the experiential part, the relational part, the epistemic part, and the experiential or phenomenological part, or the ontological part, all these components of what it means to be a person. And if you're not certainly not feeling anything and you're caught up in the, seduced by theory and intellectualizing, which a lot of people are in healthcare. Actually, analysis tends to pull in therapy. Psychotherapy tends to pull in one type of sort of morally masochistic, depressive subtype, and then analysis tends to seduce, or pull in uh, similarly, but also some that are more veiled in intellectualizing. There might be more keen on hiding behind their academic
But you're
pedigree or something.
hiding behind it. How is that but it's like how is that even possible, like, in session?
How is it possible? I'm talking
Well,
about training, but in
yeah.
session, an analyst can, I guess you couldn't be, let's say, a fully fledged analyst. Maybe you could make it through
Well, I
the
guess
the
that's one.
gauntlet,
Yeah.
but you certainly can. There are shitty analysts out. I mean, again,
Yeah,
it's
there's a
you
lot.
can be,
There's a lot of
yeah,
shitty poets too, right?
yeah, you could be just
Yeah,
very intellectualized or
yeah.
very dogmatic or very regimented or even, sort of bent the knee, fealty towards a particular theoretical orientation and be an identitarian and be like, it's all intrapsychic, it's all inner conflict as the etiology, suffering, that the cause of suffering or disease, and there's nothing more to it. And you ignore all the other sort of overdetermined variables that contribute to somebody's psychopathology. Obviously it's both, and obviously it's the nature and nurture, or the environment and the intrapsychic, or the anatomy of someone's psyche. I've attended conferences, I've had mentors or teachers or whatever that certainly skew towards a direction of a direction of identity. I'm a Freudian, I'm a Jungian. I'm as if and as the people that I look up to the most are like, recognize that identitarianism, if that's a word nowadays, it's sort of been coined, is really a bad thing. It's the more integrative and tolerant and humble and modest you are as an analyst, the easier it is, in essence, although still very hard, of course, to attune to a patient. You come in with
Right.
a theoretical agenda, you're failing them and you're fucking yourself from the get-go.
Well, I always you know, one of my favorite analysts to read is Bion, and
It would
I
be. It would
No,
be.
of course. And, I think a lot about how he talks about and the state of this ideal state that the analyst is in coming into a session, which is a state of absence of any history and desire.
Yeah, I think that's bullshit. But
Why?
because you can't be
Yeah,
absent from yourself. You can
right.
certainly I agree with Anna Freud's, I would use that phrase, of even hovering attention. I agree with all the dialectics that are involved with neutrality. I agree that it's an imperfect attempt at a blank canvas. But the idea that you could be suspended from your own history, or your own humanity, your own subjectivity, I don't think is possible. It's a nice ideal to pursue. And you don't want to pollute the frame, and you certainly don't want to bring in your own biases. But there's a difference between the humility of that neutrality and actuality versus this claim that you can divorce yourself from your own humanity, your own subjectivity, your own personality structure. I mean, that's just.
Well, I didn't think first of all, I just want oh, here. I thought I was agreeing with you because you were just saying that in some ways, when you come in with this sort of identity as I'm a Freudian, or I understand what is, I have this theoretical framework already set in place in which to understand the person before me. And that's sort of like that's first before this person who maybe you have no idea. Well, right, there's so much unknowability about what this person contains and what you guys are going to make together. And for me, I see the idea of the free floating attention as being not expressed as something that you can be, a state that you can be in all the time, but something that you grasp towards as a sort of being in the room. I
Sure.
think of like, I think of it as like ultimately paying attention. I really loved, one of my favorite articles was Giuseppe Civitari's on Beyond's concept of negative capability and faith, which talks a lot about it and brings in the poet Keats's ideas of negative capability, which is not a word he probably coined himself, but he is attributed to him mostly. But it's sort of this idea, and he'd written it about it in a letter. And, it's this idea of, he was talking about Shakespeare, and he was talking about,
Never heard of him.
yeah, Shakespeare's, incredible power as a writer because of his capacity to be in states of uncertainty and not knowing. And that this state helps one access language of achievement, he calls it, so it's like words of achievement. It's like grasping towards those words that one is hoping to get to articulate the inarticulatable thing, which is wanting so much to be articulated. And so much of the impulse for a poet is to create this poem, but when you go into a poem thinking you understand what you're going to write about and how it's written, that's that misunderstanding of creating an experience for the reader. So in other words, how do you create an experience for the reader? How do you create a poem where when I'm reading it, I don't feel like I'm being told something? I'm not being told about someone's experience. I'm not being told about what it means to look at the stars. I feel as if I am embodied in that poem. And somehow there's this incredible overlap between two experiences, two people not even present for one another. And it feels very intimate, even in its distancing. How do you do that? So how do you create this experience? I think, to come back to this idea of the Keatsian negative capability, can you create language, meaningful language, in states of not knowing and being in a way deprived of understanding of what's about to come out of your mouth, which of course sounds like Freudian right there, right? To speak
I mean, I
what,
can't. Yeah,
yeah.
I am blown away as always in our conversations by the. I thought you were going to say overlap between what we do, but it's just so uncanny. I mean, what the language you're using is uncannily, if that's a word, similar, almost homologous, not just analogous to what I do. Or what we do with patients. Co-construction, 100%. Being, not doing, 100%. Tolerating uncertainty, agnosticism, ambiguity, ambivalence, the sort of big four, in service of cultivating the fertile soil that gives rise, I'm paraphrasing all the theoreticians in my mind, of new knowledge, of new experience. And it cannot be done, right? Invention is the enemy of discovery. It cannot be done if it's contrived. If I am doing something for the patient, if I am ahead or behind, if I'm intervening, if I am impinging in some form or way, be that relational, unconscious, transferentially, or overtly, like telling them advice, the therapy is broken. The capacity for us to share in that experience of being in the shit together, the blood in the water, skin in the game. The hard part that we were just speaking to, it's very hard to teach. I don't know how you teach it, even though I supervise and teach. Then it's not therapy. It's not therapeutic. That is the mutative agent. It's like you said, it's such a beautiful metaphor. I'm going to steal that when I teach, by the way. It's not reading about somebody looking at the stars. It's the experience of you yourself looking at the stars. And my job as an analyst or a good enough therapist is to facilitate that in the spontaneity of the moment in the consulting room, in the sanctuary of the consulting room. I can't be intellectually, again, epistemically telling them. I have to have them experience that feeling of whatever the fuck it is of looking at the stars for them in service of labeling, in service of a mentalizing, reflective functioning, cogitating, whatever you want to call it, so that they can liberate themselves from these automations, defenses, ego functions, or derivatives that are getting in the way of their potential, getting in the way of their healing, getting in the way of their authenticity. And it's the inner conflict or defenses or whatever theory you want to use, something pathogenic that's getting in the way of their healthiness, their full healthiness. And
Mhm.
usually that involves I should say always involves getting to know the self. And it is language, just to put a
Yeah.
button on it, that
Well, language is our
does it.
vehicle, yeah,
Yeah, it's the
and
vehicle.
right. Right, and but there's this idea of getting to know the self, and I've been thinking so much about the idea of the autobiographical, and I couple that with the ideas of desire and memory, and I gravitate around those things right now because I'm a contemporary poet, because I read a lot of poetry that's been done throughout time, but like we've ended up in this sort of modern idea of self and autobiography as being what is the biggest concern in poetry. In other words, you're not like writing about the, labors of the king and queen or, retelling the story of, Medusa or something. But those are the right. I'm not saying those aren't part of it too. Actually, I bring up the fact because it's a problem in contemporary poetry that we are too locked into the idea of what we think the self is and what the autobiography and what speaking the autobiography means. I've learned so much being in therapy for the past like 4.5, 5 years in intensive short-term dynamic therapy. Uh, and
We won't go there.
to be you're such a hater. So right. So I will push against your saying it's bullshit with the beyond, because I do think this. I just want to come back to the idea of what does it mean for the analyst that the only real world is the psychic reality. Think for the ones, what does it mean to show up in therapy and say, and I'm sort of switching because I'm talking about the analyst and not the analyst in terms of forgetting sometimes. Like you show up and you're like, this is what my autobiography is. This is what the problems are. These are the people who harmed me. And this is, in a way, it's like you think you know what the fuck is going on. And you think by talking about it, it's going to help. But like what I've learned is that there's this thing that happens with the analyst that is actually a reality, but it is a psychic reality made out of all the experiences you've had up until then. But what you end up building is this new experience out of those old experiences that's somehow it's not like I'm telling my past. It's even though one is accessing experience they haven't had access to and giving voice to traumas that haven't had voice yet. It is always somehow, I think, involved with this unconscious psychic reality that is built with the therapist, and that when I speak it in a certain way, and when I finally get to articulating in a certain way, that is so much change happens, right? And it's almost like I'm building a new reality and a new sense of self out of the, like, I guess maybe they're like the super ego parts of who I think I am, right? So it's weird to think like there's something about self that is suffering. How do I, are we discovering ourself within us, or are we constructing a whole new self? And is it the tension between those two things? Anyway, am I transcending my autobiography by speaking my autobiography, or am I transcending my autobiography by speaking new words about autobiography and self? In other words, I think what it comes down to, Max, is like, and it's so frustrating for me as a poet, right? When I'm teaching too, is like, people are so literally minded and they think that the non-literal is not reality, as much reality as the literal. And that's just not true, right?
I'm formulating in real time. I mean, the challenge of not only breaking through what is literal or concrete, which is such a huge meaningful component of our conscious frame. That is to say, consciousness itself has a lot of principles and sort of parameters that are intrinsic to it. And that includes, a lot of homeodynamic principles: too hot, too cold, it feels good, feels bad, as much as what's threatening to the coalescence or the amalgamation or the forging, as you were speaking to, of experience. Meaning, if something's uncertain, we tend to associate it with, all of us, all humans, with anxiety. If we don't know, it makes us feel uncomfortable. If it's uncertain, we feel scared, that kind of thing. And so much of the work of psychotherapy, or rendering a poem that's experiential, as we said, it's shared. And that, I agree with you. I would say that the autobiography, and it's another metaphor I'm going to steal from you, I'll have to say, I think the autobiography is shattered, although that's a poetic way to put it. It might be teased apart, broken apart, but it is, because it's a self-concept, I would say, to translate a little bit in our, very much, again, the same concept with different language, sort of narcissism of small differences, if you will. It's a self-concept. It becomes, I should say, amenable and available to interpretation in service of divestment, we would say. You're divesting energy from these more edified or codified concepts that are core to our autobiography, and that divestment involves a re-experiencing, or an experiencing, like you said, for the first time, when it's been so automatized prior, it never had a chance to be experienced. That itself is deeply therapeutic,
Mhm.
but it's also deeply painful and anxiety provoking by the nature of how the human condition is organized. That is to say, again, the principles or foundations of what gives rise to consciousness. And so we have to always be toiling with uncertainty, and again, ambiguity, ambivalence, and agnosticism, and the not knowing. That's the only way to do it. And how many patients or students have said to me in my career, well, what do you mean? What the fuck? This is, I'm doing it. What do you want me to do? Or they'll say, well, I don't really get it, which is, it's not an unreasonable question. What's the work? What do you mean? What am I,
Mm,
am I supposed to go on the date with this guy or not? Or do I buy this car or not? Or I don't really know if I'm supposed to take this job or not. Dr.
mhm,
Max,
mhm,
can't you just
mhm.
fucking tell me?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
again, it's very similar, I imagine, to your students. And I don't know exactly what I disagreed with about BN. I don't remember, but it's just to say that the neutrality is a real thing, but it's an ideal to pursue. I think what did I get up in arms about was that even hovering attention is possible, but you can't divorce yourself from your history. So when you're facilitating, again, I am not a beyond me an expert, far from it. And so it's
Well,
just to say, my understanding is that we're doing our best to subordinate our needs in service of the frame, which we can speak about today. But my humanity, being Max, is very much
well, it's funny because when
well, I am funny.
Freud has a lot to say about that too.
Yeah, sure does. I'm
So
still in analysis. Don't worry.
don't doubt it. Yeah. So, well, I was in. I loved this idea of that Civitaris highlights, which is the sort of analyst depriving himself of memory, desire, and understanding, and to sort of put the historical reality, concrete and historical reality, in parentheses, because in my interest in memory and desire, exactly it. And I have the Wasteland right here, so I thought I'd just read the Wasteland while we did our podcast. Is that I'd read some, fuck, now I don't have the quote, but I was on Twitter and it was something about the analyst's desire being really important in the dyad. And I think it's just a kind of paradox that is right for this discussion, that there's something so important about memory and desire being suspended in order to listen,
Sure,
and
I agree with that.
and for something to happen. And it's also true that memory and desire are incredibly important in terms of, let's say, the even event and experience to happen at all. Because in a way, memory and desire are why you are here. When I say here, I mean in the chair, in analysis. And it's also, I suspect, and I've been coming to suspect more, the backbone and not backbone's the wrong metaphor or simile rather, but it's the sort of energy of all great poetry. And I'll read the first lines of The Wasteland because they're just so perfect. Um, the burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. I'm skipping ahead. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images. You cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images, where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. So that's just the beginning of this long poem. But, I know that memory is not what I think it is. It's not what I thought it was. And I know that desire also isn't what I thought it was. And I think of how far I've come in therapy in terms of just the most profound changes in my life and my sense of myself. And a lot of it has to do with this movement of memory and desire. And there's so much anxiety. I can't even express. I mean, I know like the level of anxiety that I have had historically in my therapy it's just through the roof. But it seems really, of course, really linked to those things, and to the uncertainty of just being with somebody, having this experience with a new person and growing so much out of it. That's so worth it, geez. I mean, we try to eradicate anxiety, of course, because it's when you're having panic attacks and you can't eat, it's just miserable.
Sure.
But there's this energy that comes with or from anxiety too. It's so living. God, I mean, it really does facilitate that change because something is happening.
Yeah, there's an analyst I admire a contemporary analyst named Kirk Schneider, who wrote a book about this. I believe it's a book. I'll email this to him and he'll correct if I'm wrong, but about the vitality of anxiety. And saying that, it is a misconception among theoreticians and analysts as much as patients, lay people too, that it is a catalyst in life, and it carries as much information as any other negatively charged experience or affect. And so we need it as much as we, of course, loathe it or find it uncomfortable, but there's meaning and significance to it, and it can
God, isn't it
inform
awful
us.
to think that there's no meaning and no significance to our anxiety? It's awful.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a difference between, there's so much I want to comment on into what you just said, but most recent that you just said is, that's the difference between what they call, or what Freud called suffering versus undue suffering, or quotidian suffering, which is part of the human experience that will not be eradicated, will not be immunized, and the undue neurotic suffering that is generated from, an amplification of pathology or pathos. It's
Right.
pathogenic, positive feedback loop in and of itself. And there is, as you start to feel and experience in treatment, when, you're on the couch or whatever for years and years, or even if it's not years, maybe just say dozens of hours, you start to feel that change happen. And then it grows and grows non-linearly, sort of plateaus, logarithmic, whatever. And
Brutal.
I'll soon be in my 9th year of treatment.
Yeah.
3 times a week. It's
Damn.
it's yeah, talk about life changing.
Yeah.
But back to what you're saying, it's again, it's sort of ineffable, but it's the job of the poet, right, or the analyst to render the ineffable affable, so to speak.
Hmm.
And that poem, in my experience, and this is a new skill for me, and so I'm a complete amateur, and that's why I appreciate this conversation among many reasons. And I feel and hear, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong in interpreting poetry, so I apologize for that, but um, I feel the Jungian component of my own, again, exposure, mature exposure to Jung, and
Hmm.
the shadow, the integration of the shadow, and the
Hmm.
ambivalence of life,
Hmm.
and the ambivalence that's intrinsic to, the pain that's inherent to pleasure, the pleasure that's inherent to pain, or the good and the bad, in this wasteland. And it's very true that we would say that a sign of health used to be called maybe the resolution of the transference neurosis, which is just to say the capacity to experience the analyst as a person, a subject and not an object.
Ugh.
But most meaningfully is to say that you have this asymptotic relationship
What's that mean,
where,
asymptotic?
like, an asymptote on a, it's good because the 50 people who listen to me in this stupid podcast are gonna say, Matt, what the fuck are you talking
Yeah.
about? Like an asymptote, I think of geometry from eighth grade, and there's the x-axis and the y-axis, and the asymptote of that, like, parabola, I forget
Okay.
which, y equals mx plus b type thing. And so you can never cross the x-axis, so you can never cross or transcend your own conscious experience or perception, whatever, into reality, right? You're always locked into the bony vault of your own experience, conscious awareness, perception, what
There's
have you.
something, yeah. Go
And
on.
so, long story short, when you are doing this work in resolving inner conflicts or neuroses or whatever you want to call it, interpersonally generated or intrapsychic, all the above, you do gain clarity on your own autobiography as it's reconstituted and regenerated or
Yeah.
generated for the first time.
Yeah.
And you also, and this is something that's simultaneous in the process, in speaking to anxieties, that your reality testing improves and you gain a closer and more intimate relationship that's less polluted, or the membrane, effaces, and you're closer in proximity to reality, and assessing it and appraising it and feeling with it and so on, of course, but still locked into your own subjectivity, which is part of the grieving process, part of the wasteland, and the tolerance of the ambivalence. That's it. That's what Freud always said. You're never going to not be human. I'm never going to be able to put my eyeballs into your head, or put them into the head of the cool squirrel outside, or, into my iPad. But I still can get pretty fucking close, or do better than I was doing when I was neurotically locked or
Ugh.
paralyzed or what's the word I'm looking for? Anesthetized or narcotized by my own defenses, and I didn't
Yeah.
even fucking know it.
I mean, it's weird because I have chills thinking about if I left therapy any earlier than I have. And I did have a huge rupture and left therapy for like 3 months. And I remember we were talking and I was like, I killed a nest full of baby chicks.
Oh,
The
right, right.
it was like the day I left, I was like so devastated. And I thought, in my head, I was like, I'm doing him a favor. I'm supposed to leave. I've been here too long. He wants me to leave. This
I'm
is
doing
what
him
he
a favor.
wants. I mean, this is so my attachment problems.
Should
So
I
what?
edit this part out of the episode?
No, I'm not an analyst. I don't care. Um,
I forget that you're genuinely, what's so fun. I forget that you're not an analyst.
I'm
It's
not.
so,
I'm an
maybe that's part of my
analyst.
own transference.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Your vocation is that's what's so cool. I hope we get to do 1,000 episodes, because it's so, you talk just in different words, but what you do, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. It's very, 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 very
it's
similar.
creepy, right? It's
Yeah.
creepy how similar it is because why is it similar? Well, I know because what is a poem? But the poem itself, some of these lines I'll read. We'll never, like, come under the shadow of this red rock, and I'll show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I mean, you could analyze, that it's unanalyzable, but it invites all criticism is analyzation. Anything you say about a poem is psychoanalyzing it because it is consciousness on the page, and it includes the unconscious on the page. So, I mean, how can you right? Isn't it true that one is dealing with the unconscious so profoundly in psychoanalysis, and one is dealing with the unconscious? That's what poetry really, we don't even talk about this much. Poets don't. But
What
what
what be again, talk to me like a fifth grader. What do you mean? Talk about what? So specifically or consciously
well,
or
we don't talk when I was talking about the idea of reorienting the idea of the autobiographical self in the poem, right? Because poetry, contemporary poetry, there's this person in the poem called the speaker. We call them the speaker when we talk in poetry workshops. We say this. We don't say in the poem. Bianca says, "What are the roots that clutch this brook?" They say the speaker says that. So there's this voice in the poem that's not me, but it's an I, right? It's in, whether or not it's the actual pronoun I or not, there's still somebody speaking in the poem, but there's this veil we put in between the author and the voice in the poem, right? But it's also true that it's obviously born out of my experiences. I mean, I'm talking about my daughter by name, or I'm talking about Vermont, all these things, but it's me and it's not me. But that is just highlighting the fact that I'm me and not me, that it's just highlighting the fact that my idea of self is much more complex than the usual person does. And I think about the idea, the maxim, know thyself often. One thing I love about Bion and Mike Igon, who studies, Bion, is that he emphasizes this constantly. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who is this self? I don't know who I am. You can't know yourself fully ever, right? Or this idea of multiple selves. It's always coming up in psychoanalytic theories and stuff. That's really all that's happening in poetry, is that you're having conversations with different parts of yourself. But then to bring the Jungian idea into it too, you're actually also overlapping with these universal archetypal selves that are not the self. And I'm so interested in that too, because that the implications of that are so exciting. Like there's these core images that are linked to our individual experiences within us in that shadow place, in that internal world that continue throughout time. So it's like we're all like, when you read a poem and you feel seen and heard, and like it's you and it's speaking you, and it's that feeling of experience. I mean, it might have something to do too with the sort of overlapping archetypal consciousness that's tapped into too, with like the mythopoetic and stuff like that.
it's moving to consider again how I don't know what the word of course how poetic and how ironic or coincidental or not. It's moving to experience what it is like to be understood as much as it is what it's like to be reading something and then have it unwittingly, unconsciously, unexpectedly change from reading something to experiencing something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm thinking of the poems, as I've talked to you about in the past, as a very limited purview and limited exposure, but some interest, of course. And it's only as I've stumbled into something and I'm like, holy shit, you said it very well, that this poem is me. And I'm saying, what is it about? I sent you that poem by Ray Bradbury a long time ago, when he was
It's
with Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke at I think it's Mercury missions, sending Voyager 1 maybe to Sagan might have been there, or it was before Sagan. I think it was before Sagan. I really apologize. I don't remember. I think it's the Mercury missions. And they're sending that space probe out. And he writes this poem out of thin air. Obviously, he wrote it. It wasn't improvised. But
out of
for whatever
nothing.
reason,
Poesis.
whatever reason, it's me in utter sincerity. And as far as I understand, my version of myself at this juncture, I should say, at this time. And I've listened to that poem and that
Mm.
particular YouTube video. It's not hyperbole to say 75 times
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
throughout the last
Three
decade
times
of
a
my
week for 10
life.
years now. Well,
But I
yeah,
don't know why. And
yeah,
it's because
yeah,
I like science fiction. I like space.
yeah.
But he captures something about the human condition that I find so fucking inspiring.
Right, right,
But it's not because of the one word or one
right.
metaphor. It's the experience
The
of the whole
whole thing.
goddamn thing.
And it's
I'm not a
interesting.
poet.
Well, it's not poetry. The thing to understand too about poetry, Max, is that like it's not confined to poems. And we need to remember that, because it's like a state of being. It's the genre. It's it's how consciousness functions. And it kind of goes outside genre, because I want to, we talked a lot about suffering, but like there's pleasure in it too. There's a sonic pleasure. There's feelings of love and being seen. And at the same time, to talk about ambivalence, it contains the shadow and the suffering within it. Cause like that's what's so pleasurable, I think, about poems too, is that like it somehow manages to be talking directly to you and yet not you. It's pleasurable because of its musicality, its aesthetic, its song, its words. Of course, it's words. It's all its beautiful words. And yet it oftentimes, more often than not, talks about the most difficult things to talk about, the most difficult things about being human. And I'll also say one important thing it does, and I like that you like science fiction too, because it re-entangles us with the world. When I was thinking about coming on here to talk to you, I was thinking about how my Twitter, you and I are talking right now because of my Twitter friend James Barnes, who I back in 2021, early before I started my therapy. I don't know how it came up. I think I was reading, somehow I was really suffering mentally, and I've had a long road of it, but I was desperately looking to literature and books, whatever I could find to relieve my suffering. And I was looking at Alan Watts's The Two Hands of God, and that book is all about duality. And I had this sort of thought that like maybe duality has something to do with why I'm suffering. And I looked up duality in mental health, and I came across an article he'd written about Descartes and how Descartes ruined our mental health. And essentially it was like,
Sorry.
everyone shits on Descartes, but like,
Well, the jury, I pause. The
yeah,
jury did come back, and we're dual aspect monists now. Or anybody who's worth their salt recognizes that it's both and.
yeah, of
They're not
course.
it's integrated. The
Yeah.
mind and the spirit and the brain and this is what psychoanalysis is predicated on. Sorry.
Well, I think psychoanalysis is so beautiful because it highlights self and other. It highlights boundaries, and at the same time is the most intimate, and I would even say erotic experience I've ever had in
It
my
is.
entire
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. You know what Adam Phillips says about it? I'm
He says
quoting.
a lot. Yeah.
He might be. It's the most intimate things two people can do with their pants on, or something to that
Yeah.
effect. Like
He's
when it's like the most intimate thing two people can do without fucking.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
he says something like that. Yeah.
And then he also says essentially psychoanalysis is about two people who've agreed not to have sex with each
Yeah.
other.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's. I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's so
Yeah.
right. He's so
He's
right.
so
And
good. He's amazing. He's
really,
amazing. Yeah.
really amazing for, this to constantly be coming up, because for me, when I'm in like, it can happen to men, man, woman, whatever, it
Sure.
doesn't
Yeah.
matter,
Of
right?
course.
But yeah, speaking of desire, yeah, but the tension of the erotic and the tension of the boundary and the continuous reinforcement of the boundary is such an interesting, I mean, no wonder for me, it's like there's the philosophers and the poets have been dealing with this forever. Psychoanalysis has formalized it. It's just
Yeah.
so incredible.
Almost operationalized it.
Yeah.
If I'm to speak super corporate.
Yeah. But anyway, just to put a bow on the Descartes thing, which is that like his beautiful essay, I still like think it's such a great little piece but it just is like, I mean, like, now we've ended up with this sort of like DSM world of psychology and psychoanalysis where it really separates the mind-body dichotomy. It sees things like anxiety and affects as things to be fixed only. And well, it's even like this idea of madness, right? This idea of madness as being bad and something to fix, and you need to be cured in a certain way. And I think, no, I mean, that's really not what ends up happening in therapy. Yes, you get cured. Yes, you learn to not suffer as much, and you're not going to, hopefully you're not, I feel like I just don't want to kill myself. But like, it's still to take away my madness. I mean, what a horrible thing. Take away all my affects. I mean, who am I? Right? I don't want that.
Right. It's. I apologize. There's like 5 quotes that I wanted to get down.
You go.
While you were but it's true. You can't. First of all, in other episodes I've done with colleagues, the DSM being non-etiological, the DSM being even its nosological components, that is the organization of disease, is now pretty controversial because there was a lot, without getting lost in the weeds, of the history of the sort of
Healthcare.
healthcare and the castration
Insurance.
analysis in 1980 and moving towards medical model, biological reductivism, and a pharmacological model. And yes, so the point is the pendulum swung really far, and then it swung really far again. And in the 2010s, morally speaking, the moral landscape got very sharp. We're still living through that. And then, which we're not going to get into today. And then now there's the people I admire the most are the people that are integrative and saying it's always been both. It's always been biological. It's always been genetic and epigenetic. It's always been environmental. It's always, so we tried, like Nancy McWilliams, who I have these quotes here from other analysts. And she's, one of the greatest, the GOATs, the greatest of all time, in saying it's about understanding as many disciplines as possible, including she speaks to, when I teach, I speak to what she says. And you better fucking learn your humanities, including poetry or some, again, like my amateur understanding, and that it will help you as a therapist, regardless of if you're an analyst or not. With that said, I have to find, you echoed, not a coincidence, this exact quote. Oh my God, it's going to kill me. It's not it. There's one from Freud here I'll read for the sake of time. It is not the same to know a thing in one's own mind and to hear it from someone outside. Side by side with the exigencies of life, love is the great educator. And it is by the love of those nearest him or her that the incomplete human being is induced to respect the decrees of necessity. That one always struck me as well, but that wasn't the quote. But it captures, again, that it's healing through love. And that Freud always spoke to that, and that people such straw man and bastardize him in the worst ways when he was the first one speaking to and operationalizing some of the stuff that it's love, it's connection, it's libido or eros that facilitates so much of what we're talking about. You can't, the metaphor that comes to mind is if you're forged, the alloy of you is forged by your primary caregivers, be it parents or not. If that is to be reforged in the crucible or the kiln or whatever in the analytic relationship, boy oh boy is love going to be involved. Even if I'm suspending my desires and memory, even if I'm subordinating my needs that are only being essentially mediated by the fee and the frame, and that's it, my care for the patient, of course my love for the patient is still there. And that's very lost on people, students and analysans alike, because they think, well, don't you like me, Dr. Max, type of thing. And I have to make interpretation, help them understand the desire and so on. But fundamentally, elementally, of course, if I couldn't experience what you're experiencing or have what Nancy calls, what does she speak to? Something to the effect of an authentic empathy versus prefabricated, or the virtue of empathy. That is to say, actual skin in the game, best approximation of what it's like, the Thomas Nagel stuff, what it's like to be a BAP and what it's like to be you. If I'm not doing that, I'm failing the patient. There's no therapy going on again. And how do you teach that? Back to where we started. This is going to kill me. This is another one. Anthony Storr. Oh my God, these are so good. Nancy fucking rules. Okay, Anthony Storr, this is in 1990. This wasn't that long ago. Just before, Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan. He was already playing for the Bulls.
It was a great year, great time.
Great year. What won an Oscar? Dances with Wolves. 1990. What wins an Oscar? That. I don't know. I don't think it is. It could have been 1989. 1991, Silence of the Lambs. 90, I don't know.
Silence of the Lambs was so good. There's an analyst.
Yeah, exactly. All right, listen, this one will fuck you up.
Okay.
This is on the chapter 12 in Nancy's book on, I just did this in a class, just finished this with a class, on his practitioner's guide, a more practical approach technique of being an analyst for those interested. And of course, somehow she makes it intelligible to people who are just learning, because she's incredibly talented. So chapter 12 is the end of the book on self-care, meaning self-care for the analyst. Top of the page, top of the chapter. A certain kind of therapist may almost, and by the way, this wasn't the quote I was looking for, may almost disappear as a definable individual in rather the way that some self-sacrificing Christian ladies become non-entities. A non, obviously. People who are simply there for others rather than existing in their own right. Back to the self, as you're talking about, in its fluidity. When psychotherapy is practiced every day and all day, it's brutal. It's something when
Can't imagine.
There is a danger of the therapist becoming a non-person.
Yeah, in a bad
prostitute, a prostitute parent whose children are not only all illegitimate, but more imaginary than real. Back to that membrane again. Boundary is being crossed or not. It is essential for the therapist, therefore, to find some area in which he or she lives for himself or herself alone, in which self-expression rather than self-abnegation is demanded. And this is a beautiful encapsulation of, our needs when we don't need to suspend them and when we're still human, because we're so idealized by the nature of being in this chair all the time, and we have to hold that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quote I'm looking for, which I'm not going to find today, but essentially says that, but uses the word of frustration and uses the word frustration and deprivation, and that capacity to tolerate never being satiated in this chair. And I'm so sorry. The quote does better. Obviously, it's more poetic than what I'm saying, but it's that. And that capacity to be in that space, but still be able to hold on to the reality that I have a self, or a self in development,
Mm-hmm.
and I contain multitudes and so on,
Mm-hmm.
still be able to do the job and not pollute the countertransferential dynamic, let's say the avenue coming out of me, in a certain way speaking, with my frustration because this patient's, difficult, or not listening, or they haven't paid their bill, or whatever, or I'm fucking hungry, or I have to take a shit. This is the thing that I say this, I speak to students in the exact same way. That's not talked about. And part of what motivated me to do this podcast, start this stupid little platform. It's like, that shit's hard. And Nancy does a great job. Maybe I'm more irreverent or might use my sense of humor, whatever, but it's brutal. And you grow inured to it. You grow accustomed to it. You assimilate to it, but your humanity doesn't go away.
But there was yeah.
And so that tolerance is such a meaningful facilitator of healing.
Yeah.
And what is gratifying, ironically, putting my finger in the air, I'm wagging, is that you can see it when it helps people. You can feel it when when somebody's moving through the work and healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be gratifying, not in a narcissistic way, not in a secondary gain. We call it secondary gain, but in a primary way where you're not impinging, not polluting, and still being able to get through the workday.
I mean, it's funny because as an analyst, and I've been really going through it, but like I've had such a shift in my analysis suddenly because it was such a big moment to be like, start seeing each other in person again. And that was all me. Like I finally said that. And I won't even get into it. It's giving me anxiety just talking about it. But what was I gonna say? Oh, just that a big shift is happening, a good shift. But when I can see him getting a kind of gratification over seeing me change, and for real. Like it's so funny because I'm like, I thought I changed before, and I thought I had an experience before, but it keeps changing. That rubric keeps changing, right? And it keeps getting even more real, and I keep stepping more into reality. And it was interesting in that quote too, that she said that to be in analysis every day and to suppress, kind of like you're kind of suppressing who you are, right? I mean,
I can't
not
use that word. That word is a touchy one because it's
like,
very meaningful in our
oh,
trade.
right.
We
Not
wouldn't
okay.
say suppress.
Right. Okay.
We would say subordinate. We'd say subordinate. We use the most. I would say suspend is a good one. Isolate,
Suspend.
compartmentalize-ish, but suppress is a willful intent. It
Okay.
has sort of a difficult
But
connotation. It has a defensive connotation.
okay. But that it create that to be like the prostitute mother whose children not only disappear but are imaginary is such a terrifying and beautiful image to
Exactly.
create here, because it's like
Exactly.
to, in a sense, maybe like give oneself, or like a nun would be like, I'm giving my whole self to God. Like it's this empathetic sacrifice, but actually it's such a disservice to the patients who disappear, who aren't real to the or mother. But I
Your
think,
mother's a whore.
yeah, I think
Tell your mother I said hello.
but I think just this, I think those little moments of annoyance or frustration, or I see them too, and they're distressing, but like I think all the moments where I've seen my analyst glimpsed who he is all of a sudden have been really helpful for me in this really complicated way. Like I think it does highlight a lot of ambivalence about what's happening, and all those things are important, I think, as we move forward together to like slowly see reality and to just
Yeah, I think that
yeah.
there's a hot debate, if you want to get into it, among analysts in modern times, where the interrelationalists, maybe the intersubjectivists, in these sort of later stage waves of analysis that are constantly in conflict. I'm going to be as diplomatic as possible because I'm not well versed in the subject. From the ego psychologists, or the more sort of more contemporary Freudians or Jungians or something. And again, it's I'm paraphrasing, of course, and doing a little bit of a disservice, but they speak to, in essence, self. It's what they're speaking to is how much of the self is present, right? How much of your humanity or even self-disclosure. And it's challenging because it's a balance, of course. There's a tightrope to walk. At the same time, in my experience, it's not only case by case with the patient, it's also case by case with the therapist or the analyst.
Yeah.
Because everyone's style is different. And there are some people who are able to provide a certain quality of self and self-disclosure and intimacy and availability without breaching the frame, as we call it. And there's other people who can't, just by the nature of their style, their talents, their capacities. And there's no right or wrong.
Right.
Again, fuck me, because I don't want to fight anybody.
Right.
I don't need an enemy, so to speak. But it's really true. So Nancy is a good example because of her incredible talents. She can, and she writes about it in her early cases, where self-disclosure helped her and harmed, or other times just harmed, other times just helped. But she's, one of the greatest. And it's like back to that sort of meritocracy reality where there are analysts that are better than other analysts, or therapists that are better than other therapists. And so you can't say, for some people, I have to really play by the rule book, and boy, oh boy, will I keep the frame, and I'll stay sort of a human, but non-human entity at the same time. And there's other people who can play, and there's other people with spontaneity and improvisation and humanity and camaraderie, and they can do it and still sustain and suspend and subordinate themselves enough that the neutrality and freedom is held, in the privacy of the room.
I think it's beautiful because the whole thing speaks to the fact that,
Well, I think you're beautiful.
thank you. It's like where there's so many shades of people, and there's so many different events that happen between people, and to be attuned to one another and to cater to that and to adjust, and it's what makes it interesting. It's not, you can't say all analysts are the same. They're not the same. They have their own unconscious at work. They have their own experiences that, even though they're not spoken, are there, maybe, and that's the Keatsian negative capability too. Like, not everything that's seen and spoken means that it's not there, having an effect, In fact, what's not seen and spoken makes the poem, makes it. In fact, if you tell everything, you ruin the poem. And any great
Right.
poet will know that.
Yeah. So now it's back to further metaphors of not only showing, not telling, experiencing, not doing.
But it's the
and then
leaving
it's
out of the fragmentation too.
right.
And
What comes into relief and the negative. Right. So this is what Nancy calls inviting in the hostility or the hate, the shadow, the negatively charged transference being a necessary avenue of information, and it's all information. And then also what you're speaking to, what we call the iatrogenic variable, which is the measurement itself can affect can cause or play a role as a causal variable in the effect or result of the experiment. The measurer, like in a quantum thing, like you observe the state of the electron, and then you can only get its location and its velocity, whatever, or speed, or spin. And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to be considerate of that when we interpret or when we're silent, if I bring something up to reflect on for the patient or not, it has an effect. There's a causal capacity to it. It's not just a neutral message. The medium itself has a directionality and vector. That's why analysts should be better versed in physics. I think it's helped me. I think it's helped me. The metaphors in physics help me.
Totally.
The cosmology or astronomy, it's helped me. And particle physics. I'm a total idiot in that stuff, but it does help because the measurement can cause change, and not necessarily sometimes you can impinge and not cause change in the correct, so to speak, or the healthful direction. And so you learn, back to anxiety, you learn very early on in this practice that a lot of the times, I'm thinking of mentors I admire in group chats and other people I've met on Twitter, and thank God they're wonderful people because there's so many shitheads on Twitter who say, shut the fuck up. And literally that's what they'll say to a supervisee, and that hold the space for the patient. Why are you saying something? What is it about your own anxiety you're not analyzing or experiencing or interpreting? because the patient's been in silence for a couple of minutes. And you're going, well, what's on your mind? Or how does that make you
Well,
feel?
it's
Or
funny,
some bullshit.
not to make it about poetry too, but it's like, it's sort of brutal in poetry too. And like any good teacher will say, you have to let the silence sit to see what happens. And especially with poetry, it needs a big silence. And there's different reasons for silence, but it's like the silence is brutal sometimes and it's beautiful sometimes. And it's interesting to see in psychoanalysis too, the different kinds of silences.
Yeah, there's warm
Yeah.
and comfortable, and then there's deeply. I've been in silences with patients over the last decade that, I mean, more hostile than somebody telling me to go fuck
Yeah.
myself
Yeah.
and I'm gonna murder your
Yeah.
family. I mean, a silence that is so saturated
Yeah.
with disavowed and
Projection.
externalized
Yeah.
rage
Yeah.
that they themselves can't experience because it's too dangerous,
Right.
but it's just floating there like this cancerous, fucking corrosive nebula of doom. And I'm in it with them. I'm not exaggerating. I've had sessions that are 40 minutes of that, of silence.
Ooh.
It's just, and earlier on when you're in training, you tend to have, just like any form of healthcare residency, you tend to work with people who are more sick by the nature of them going to a clinic or
Yeah.
a mental health facility
Right.
that takes, Medicaid or whatever. You know how it works. And so it's profound. And you're so inexperienced and you're just like,
Yeah.
I feel like
Don't
I'm gonna
hurt
shit my
me.
pants.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shit my
Yeah.
pants.
Yeah.
I'm listening to like my first supervisor, my third supervisor I've ever had. And they're telling me I can't say anything, right? I have to feel this, right?
Well, isn't there a limit to the silence? I mean,
Yeah, but you don't know, you don't have the clinical
yeah.
competence, experience, or confidence to know.
Yeah.
So I can't make that decision yet for myself.
Right.
Back to the version of myself I was just starting my analysis.
Right.
I didn't know up from down.
Yeah.
I'm playing by the book, by the rules, because I don't want to get in trouble. At the same time, I'm flouting rules
Yeah.
left and right.
Yeah.
It's uncanny. It's just like saying with us students you've experienced through your own training as a poet. It's like, I didn't know you could play. I didn't know the rules were meant to be bent. So,
Yeah,
even
it
some
takes a
broke it.
lot of it takes a lot of time. And it's good to put the time in. It's so good. It feels so good to put the time in. It feels so good to know that it never ends. Like you just
Right.
keep
No,
learning,
I agree with you.
you
Yeah.
keep learning how to negotiate silences and talking and words and embarrassment and love and hate. And it's like it's very fun. I'm so happy that it's like being in therapy, engaging with therapists too it's funny that this whole Twitter world has happened for me. I've felt really guilty about it sometimes too. And yes, I of course want to be close to my own therapist through it, but like it speaks so much to poetry in a way and language and being that and philosophy too, which has opened up for me so much that it really makes life like the work, right? This is the work. And just to kind of come back to what we were saying in the beginning, it's like a lot of it's knowledge, a lot of it's big words, a lot of it's theories and, different books that you love and are collecting and everything. But it ain't nothing like the actual poem.
No.
It's nothing like writing that poem and doing it good. Nothing. And it's nothing like being in the room with your analysts and for you on both ends of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I also think before we finish up today, I use metaphors as you obviously do, because as best we can to capture the experience. And there's like a race car comes to mind, and it's the idea of you could watch a Formula One race or NASCAR or whatever you're into, motorsport, but the idea of being in the car
mhm,
of a professional driver and feeling what they can. And it's so funny how arrogant we all are,
yeah,
or a surgeon
yeah,
or anybody, or a master, at their instrument, a pianist or a violinist. And they always that phrase that they make it look so easy, and then you try to do it yourself. It's always the funniest part,
yeah,
like you said, the heartwarming part is that
yeah,
we're so much more alike than we are dissimilar as human beings. And you're in the room with somebody who's incredibly talented in some way, as a patient for me, and I'm in the room and and I admire whatever their gift is, and yet they look at me like I have it figured out,
yeah.
right? They look at me like and but it's like, it's very funny that you need to idealize the
Yeah.
analyst, especially in the beginning, in service of
My
all sorts of things.
God.
But it's so funny how you can't know, like you said, until you do it or it. I use I'm thinking of colleagues metaphors. Always training for a marathon's a good one, right? Because try practicing. You could plan a route of running or plan a regimen to train for 26 miles, but go run 18 miles, in practice and go feel that. Or another one people use is dancing. That's a
Mhm,
great one because there's two partners.
mhm,
So
mhm,
you can learn choreography and learn to practice, but go do that dance. You're learning ballroom or whatever.
mhm.
and do it in front of people, tolerate the improvisation and spontaneity needed to make the moves flow and coalesce and all that thing. Go do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, but I could dance.
Yeah.
I've been to weddings before.
Right.
Go watch somebody who's a professional, I don't know I don't know the word, ballroom dancer, bachata dancer, whatever it is. And it's like, oh my God, go see a Broadway show. And it's like, they make it look so easy.
I know these lines may take us hours, maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, all our stitching and unstitching has been for naught, right? It's gotta look that way to be art, right? But for psychoanalysis, it's a little more, it's weirder because it's hidden and you're doing something, just the two of you in a room, and I always wanted to be the good patient. I always wanted to do, be like smart and interesting and all of it. And I'm just frozen for like 4 years, I'm just like, can't speak, I'm in year 5 now. And it's like, this is what it's like being with you like this. It's so collaborative and it's still so bizarre. It's still so strange and it's scary and exciting. And sometimes I feel like, why am I here? But I keep thinking, no, something really amazing is happening in my life. And I feel like all of a sudden I can appreciate that for him, it might be something interesting too. Like I never thought I was saying, I've got to get out of here. I've got to be a really good patient, that I got to get the fuck out of here. And no, what is this thing we're doing together? We're figuring something out about me. And yet it's not about me. It's something about just being two people and being in the world. And it's I feel like actually very idealistic in a way that most things in our world are not. And that to me is a good thing. It's not like utopian, fantasy.
No, it's grounded in reality. I spoke to a supervisee today about this, and it's authenticity is what you're speaking to. It is. We could sort of maybe end on this note that authenticity is going to become a commodity, especially because we were speaking to AI and what's going to disrupt therapy, of course, and what's already happening. But the reality is authenticity will always transcend that. And people are always going to desire it. And it's going to be our sword and shield in protecting meaningful or good enough or depth-oriented therapy. And that you can feel what's authentically being built together. You can feel the genesis of the earnestness and intimacy of what's going on. And it's arguably invaluable. It can't be simulated. There's no facsimile of it. There's no possibility of it being, emulated without conscious experience itself or the human condition. And it's uncanny how powerful that can be and how moving it can be for anybody when in life we can feel so alone, so misunderstood, so unseen until that, collaboration or amalgamation happens in the room to catalyze movement, just like poetry. And it's incredibly special and of course needs to be promulgated, proliferated, celebrated, whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
With that said, can you fucking introduce yourself?
Yes.
And I'll put it at the top of the episode because you didn't do that yet.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Bianca Stone. I'm a poet. I've published 3 full-length books. My 4th full-length book is The Near and Distant World from Tin House Books, coming out in January.
Let's go.
And it's actually an entirely book. It's not even that secret. Full of the psychoanalytic dyad and other conflicts and its powers too.
And you're being too modest. You teach where?
I do. I run a literary nonprofit called the Roustone House here in Vermont. I teach at UMass Amherst. I teach at Dartmouth.
And I'm sorry, what awards have you won and what's your title?
Right, I'm the Vermont Poet Laureate. And
let's go.
Yeah. And
that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
I'm not New Jersey's psychoanalyst laureate.
They should have it. They should have a psychoanalytic laureate.
I'm gonna write the governor.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be it.
That would be amazing. I was thinking it'd be cool if they had one for a philosopher and
but not a mental health czar.
Yeah. But it's nice that it's this thing for poets that's endured since Greek times.
It's very cool. Yeah. I'm happy and proud of you. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Max.
I can't wait to do this again.
Me too.
We have so much to cover and talk about.
So much.
Don't go anywhere.